Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Hit the bell icon button so that you don't miss out any tutorial.
Hello, and welcome back to another Eduonix tutorial. My name is Matthew Brown, and I'm your instructor for this course. So far in this course, we've covered several sections. Getting started in Photoshop, how to use the tools in Photoshop, and getting acquainted with Photoshop's workflow. In this video, we'll be starting a new section, Photo Correction. We've already been using some of Photoshop's healing tools to help correct photos, but we only made minor corrections on very small parts of the image. How do we go about correcting an entire photo? One issue photographers run into is perspective distortion. This is a result of either taking a photo at an undesired angle or using a camera lens that provides a wide-angle shot but curves and distorts its edges. These aren't necessarily bad things, but many serious photographers turn to Photoshop to help achieve their desired photos after they've already taken them. I have a photo here of a large front porch. It's a decent photo, but you can probably tell that something isn't quite right. The angles of these arches aren't quite centered, and these steps below are way off. I'll pull up some perfectly straight lines to show you what I mean. I'll just go up to View, Rulers. Then I'll click inside these rulers and drag out to place my guides. I'm going to place a few near the columns. Then I'll place a few near the steps. You can see that the columns aren't actually too bad, but the steps definitely don't look right. I'll hide my guides by going back up to View, Show, Guides. Then I'll put my rulers away by going back up to View, Rulers. A very easy tool to correct perspective is actually one that I've touched on before. I'm going to go in the Tools panel and right-click the Crop tool to get to my Perspective Crop tool. Then I'll start by making my first point near the edge of these bricks on the top left. Then I'll go all the way across for my second point in a similar area on my bricks. Then I'll go down to the edge of the steps for my third point. Then I'll go all the way back across on the steps to make my final point. This box I just drew will represent the new perspective I want the photo to have. I'll just drag the edges out to encompass most of the photo on the left and right, and on the top, and on the bottom. Now to commit this, I'll just go up in the tool options and click on the check mark. Okay, my image has been corrected. I'm going to pull my guides back up to see how I did by going up to View, Show, Guides. Okay, not too bad. The steps towards the bottom still look a little bit askew, but overall, this is a good perspective change. As you can see, using the Perspective Crop tool can be very quick and pretty effective. I'm going to switch gears here and go to my next image. Okay, so this image is suffering from some perspective distortion as well. But you can see it's got some lens distortion too, as the edges of the photo seem to curve out from the center onward. I'm going to need something a little more powerful than the Perspective Crop tool for this. I'm going to try a lens correction filter this time. But before I do that, I'll duplicate my layer by checking the Layers panel to make sure that my background layer is selected. Then I'll hit Ctrl-J on my keyboard to jump or duplicate this layer above itself. Now that I have a copy of my original image, I'll go up to Filter, Lens Correction. Similar to what I did to the previous image with the guides, I'm going to go down here to where it says Show Grid, and I'll turn that on. Now we have a better idea of what needs to be done. If I check in my options here on the right, you can see it's currently set to auto correction. While auto correction sounds nice, it can only work if I know more details about this photo, such as the camera's make, the camera's model, and the lens model. Unfortunately, I don't have that information. I'm just trying to fix this photo the best that I can. So I'll go here to the top of the options and switch over to Custom. Wow, there are a lot of sliders here. Hopefully, I won't have to change all of them to get what I want. I think first I'll focus on this option near the bottom, Vertical Perspective. I'll go ahead and start sliding this to the left and pay attention to these two main columns in the middle of my image. Now what this is doing is stretching the right and left sides of the top of the image to match the width of the bottom of the image. Okay, it's looking good at about -30, so I'll keep that there. Now I'll go up to the top and use this slider called Remove Distortion. I'm going to slide this to the right while focusing on this curved roof here. What this is doing is actually puckering the image from the middle, sort of pulling the center sides in while pushing the edges out. And it's looking pretty good at about +40, so I'll keep that there. This image looks a lot better. I'm going to go down to Scale and shrink this whole thing down to around 75% so I can see what the lens correction has done. As you can see, the edges have really been puckered in, and the top is now wider than the bottom. I'll bump the scale back up around 90% and click OK. Now I can compare my original layer to my lens corrected layer. Original, corrected. It's definitely a noticeable improvement. Not bad for only having to play with 2 different sliders. I want to keep both of these, so I'm going to rename these to Original and Lens Correct. There's one more method I want to show you. It takes a little more work, but it's probably the most effective out of all of them. First, I'll select my original layer. Then I'll hit Ctrl-J to duplicate it. Then I'll drag it to the top of my layers. Now I'll go up to Filter, Adaptive Wide Angle. Normally, Adaptive Wide Angle would rely on my photo's data to fix this automatically. But once again, I'm going to go Custom. So I'll go to Correction and make sure I have Fisheye selected. Then I'll go down to Scale and bring it down to around 85%, so the image will have some room to breathe. And I'll keep my crop factor at 10. Then I'm going to start sliding my focal length down from 7.07. You can see it's already starting to distort my image. I like it right here, around 3 millimeters. Here's the cool part. I'll go up to the top left and make sure I have my constraint tool selected. Then I'll go down to the left edge of this planter and just click and drag to the right. You can see that my line is already curving, sort of following the edge of the planter. I'll go ahead and release this on the opposite side of my planter. The constrain tool has taken my curved edge and straightened it out. But it looks like the curve was a little bit off in the middle. There's a little box here that I can click and drag to match the curve perfectly. My goal is to make this entire image perfectly level. But so far, all these constrained lines will only straighten the edges I use them on. If I want to make my line perfectly level, I can just right-click it and click horizontal. Now the planter edge is perfectly straight and level. And Photoshop is automatically warping the rest of the image to try to match my line. If I want to make a perfectly level line without having to do any extra steps, I can just press and hold the Shift key as I'm dragging the line. Constraining in this way isn't limited to just horizontal lines. I'm going to go to these columns, hold the Shift key, and make some vertical lines. Since this image curves more towards its edges, the idea is to start with a straight foundation in the middle, then work my way outwards. I'm going to really work on this image. I want to use adaptive wide angle to its fullest extent. I'm just going to repeat this process, finding curved edges, and using my constrain tool to correct every single one. Okay, I am done. I'm going to go back to Scale and bring this back up to 100%. Then I'll hit OK and see how it measures up with my other layers. Wow, that's a huge improvement. Here's my original, my lens correct, and my adaptive wide angle. You can see that with lens correct, I made a very quick correction, but it ended up warping the building improperly. It exaggerated the height of the building and neglected a lot of curves on both the right and left sides. But now, with the adaptive wide angle, everything is where it's supposed to be, and the edges of the building line up with each other beautifully. There's just one more thing I want to do. There's a big hole in the middle of the ground here. I think I'm just going to crop this out. I'll go up and get my regular crop tool, click in my image, drag up to cover it, and click Enter to commit my crop. Beautiful. Okay, we learned that you can use the Perspective Crop tool to quickly correct the perspective of an image. We learned that we could use the Lens Correction filter to quickly fix perspective and lens distortion. And we learned how to go in depth with our corrections using the Adaptive Wide Angle filter. That will do it for perspective distortion. In this section, we're going over photo correction in Photoshop. And in this video, we'll be covering Liquefy Adjustment. What is Liquefy Adjustment? Well, you're not converting your image into water or even working with liquid at all. When you liquefy a layer, you're making it moldable. Liquefy allows you to grab areas of your image and warp them around. So instead of erasing, coloring, and chopping, you're just pushing the pixels where you want them. I like this image because it has a lot of wavy hairs that I can bend and pull around. This will help you to see how the liquefy process works. To start off, I'm going to duplicate my current layer by hitting Ctrl-J on the keyboard. Now, to liquefy this layer, I'll go up to Filter, Liquefy. This has brought up a whole new window. In here, we have my image in the middle, which hasn't changed. It hasn't changed yet because I have to tell Liquefy what to do. The main tool to use is up here on the top left. It's called the Forward Warp tool, and I'll just make sure that I have it selected and brush it in the image. You can see that as I drag it around my image, it's essentially pushing or smudging these areas around. In fact, it does remind me of the smudge tool. The main difference between this and the smudge tool are all the new options I have at my disposal. If I check here on the right, there's some tool options. There's brush size, obviously controlling the size of the brush, and below it I have brush pressure, which controls the strength of the push the brush applies. And these options aren't limited to just the Forward Warp tool. In fact, most of these tools on the left operate with the same basic size and pressure options. Below the Forward Warp tool, I have something called the Reconstruct tool. As I drag it in my image, you can see it acts as sort of an undo eraser. I can use it to sort of push things back to the way they were. This is important because I don't have access to the history panel while I'm in the Liquefy window. If I want to undo all of my Liquefy, but I don't want to cancel out the whole window, I can just click this Restore All button over here on the bottom right, and it will revert my whole image back to its original state. To the left, below the Reconstruct tool, I have this thing called the Pucker tool. I'm going to go ahead and click and hold this on my image. What this is doing is it's shrinking everything inside the brush toward the very center. And you'll notice that it leaves the very edges of the brush intact. The longer I hold this in one place, the more it shrinks. Kind of looks like a black hole. Below the pucker tool, we have its exact opposite, the bloat tool. I'm going to go ahead and click and hold in one spot. Nothing happens. That's because this tool will only bloat things as long as you're moving the mouse. A lot of people find this tool difficult to control, but it's pretty simple. You just click and drag at a slow speed to make small changes, and click and drag at a faster speed to make big changes. Finally, below the bloat tool, we have a tricky one, the push left tool. Basically, this one works exactly like the forward warp tool, only it redirects everything to the left of whatever direction we're moving. So, if I drag up, it will push left. If I drag down, it will push right. If I drag left, it will push down. And if I drag right, it will push up. Like I said, it's a little tricky, but it makes it so that instead of dragging many lines with the forward warp tool, you can just drag one line with the push left tool. But the Liquefy filter doesn't end there. You may have noticed here in the options, there's an unchecked box called Advanced Mode. I'm going to go ahead and check this. Wow, this really is Advanced Mode. The first thing I notice here in the tool options are these brush density and brush rate sliders. So far, we know that brush pressure controls the strength of the brush, how hard we're pulling the pixels from their original position. Brush density basically controls how thick the bristles of our brush are. Let me show you what I mean. I'll make sure that I have my forward warp tool selected, and I'll make sure that my brush size is at 100, my density is at 0, and my pressure is at 100. Then I'll just click and drag in my canvas. Okay, so this brush is making a thin but strong warp, meaning that it's moving a few pixels a long way. I'm going to go ahead and increase my density up to 100 and try again. So now my brush is making a much thicker warp that's just as strong. So it's moving a lot of pixels a long way. Brush rate is a little bit different. It mostly controls other Liquefy tools, like the pucker and bloat tools. Remember when I was using the pucker tool to just click and hold in one spot to make that black hole looking thing? I'm going to do that again, with the brush rate at different values. First, I'll get my pucker tool and keep the brush rate at 100. Then I'll just click and hold in one spot. You can see that it very quickly accelerates, shrinking everything towards the middle. Now I'll go up and decrease the brush rate to around 25. And try clicking and holding in one spot again. You can see that it's doing the same thing, but much slower. It's sort of going in stages, instead of shrinking everything all at once. Now that we have the Advanced section open, there's some new options in our Tools panel. This one, above the Pucker tool, is called the Twirl Clockwise tool, and it's another tool that is affected by brush rate. That is to say that it will spin faster at 100 brush rate than it will at 25. If I bring my brush rate back up to 100, and click and hold in my image, it will make a spiral going clockwise. If I want to make the spiral go counterclockwise, I can just press and hold the Alt key, and it will spin in the opposite direction. Another tool I have above the Twirl tool is called the Smooth tool. Now the Smooth tool is a little unique. It functions a little like the Reconstruct tool, but it doesn't go as far as to completely undo your changes like the Reconstruct tool will do. To demonstrate what I mean, I'll get my Reconstruct tool and apply it to the spiral on the right. You can see how it very quickly just vanishes my spiral as I drag over it. Now I'll get the Smooth tool and try the same thing on the other spiral. You can see that it not so much erases my spiral as it tries to sort of make more sense of the spiral, pushing things in an area where they make more sense, but not necessarily undoing the warp. Eventually, I'll get to a point where the tool doesn't really seem to be making much of a difference anymore, which should mean that my image is back to normal. But if I go over here and click the Restore All button, you can see that there would have been a lot more to go to make my image normal again. Another tool we have near the bottom here is called the Freeze Mask tool. This is very useful. Let's say that I want to move all this fur around, but I don't want to affect this lady's face. Well, I could go around very carefully and painstakingly brush all the fur while trying to avoid the face. Maybe I could use the Reconstruct tool here or there if I make any mistakes. Or I could use the Freeze Mask tool to protect her face before I do any warping at all. All I have to do is use the Freeze Mask to paint in the areas I want to freeze or protect. Then I'll go here near the bottom right and uncheck Show Mask. Now I'll get my Swirl tool and just go crazy with it. You can see that even though the Swirl tool is making some massive changes all over this image, the face remains exactly where it is. There's one more option I want to show you. You see these areas where I twirled near the edges? I made these sort of holes because I brought these areas of the image too far in. Fortunately, there's an option below the brush rate on the right called Pin Edges. I'll just check that, and boom, my edges are fixed. This sort of stretches my image to fill the gaps. Very cool. Okay, that will do it for the Liquefy filter. In this section, we're going over photo correction in Photoshop, and in this video, we'll be performing a double raw conversion. These days, most good digital cameras will provide you with a variety of file types to work with. Some of these are very simple, like JPEGs. JPEGs are great because they're compressed to a low file size and are quickly ready to share. But there are also more complex file types that aren't compressed. Instead, they allow you to change the raw properties of the photo even after you've taken it. Photoshop makes a program that allows you to manipulate these raw photos, called Camera Raw. Camera Raw pairs with Photoshop, and it's an essential feature for the serious digital photographer. But Camera Raw isn't exclusive to raw photos. I'm going to show you how to pull just a regular JPEG into Camera Raw and perform a double raw conversion. I'm going to open my photo. Usually I would go up to File, Open, but that's not going to open my photo in Camera Raw. Instead, I'm going to go down to Open As. Here's my photo right here. I'm going to select it, And you can see that it's just a regular JPEG if you look in the file name. Then I'll go over here and click this box on the right that says Photoshop. When I click this, it's going to pull up a whole menu of file types. And I'm going to go down and click the one that starts with Camera Raw. Then I'll click Open. Okay, now we are in the Camera Raw window. Up here on top, there's a bunch of tools. And over here on the right, there's a lot of different sliders. I'm not going to use any of these just yet. Instead, I want to continue to open this in Photoshop. But before I click this Open Image button, I'll press and hold the Shift key. This will open the image as a smart object, so I can go back and change these values later on if I want. Okay, now I have my photo as a smart object in the Layers panel. I want to duplicate this smart object, but I want it to be a new smart object and not link back to the previous one. So I can go up here to Layer, Smart Objects, New Smart Object via Copy. Or I could just right-click my layer and click New Smart Object via Copy. Now I have my photo in two different smart objects, and I can edit them individually in Camera Raw. To open up Camera Raw again, I'll just double-click the thumbnail for my layer on top. Now that I have a new duplicate raw image, I can feel comfortable with playing with these options. I like this image, but it looks a little too bright and overexposed. I want to bring out the details of the foreground a little more, especially this lady's jacket and face. I'll go to Exposure and bring it down to -0.5. I'll bring the contrast up to +30. I'll take the highlights down to -100. I'll keep the shadows at 0. I'll bring the whites up to +30. I'll keep the blacks at 0. I'll bring the clarity up to +50. And finally, I'll take the saturation down to -100. Then I'll click OK. Turning down the saturation made this black and white, but I don't intend to keep it that way. I want to keep the brightness levels of this image with the colors of my original image. So, to blend them together, I'll click the Blend Mode picker and go down to Luminosity. Now I'm getting all the detail without changing the color too much. This has made a nice contrast on my image, but I want to make her stand out from the background a bit more. So what I'll do is mask this layer, so it only affects the areas I want. I'll click the Layer Mask button. Then I'll invert the mask by hitting Ctrl-I on my keyboard. Now I can get a white brush and just paint in the areas I want to reveal. I want to focus on her upper half, so I'll just continue painting an outline. Then I'll fill my outline. and just do some touch-up here and there. Okay, there's a basic introduction to Camera Raw with a double RAW conversion. We'll go over some more things in Camera Raw later on, but for now, that will do it for this video. In this section, we're going over photo correction in Photoshop, and in this video, we'll be going over the image processor. Trophies. Nobody cares how you got them, they just care that you have them. And everybody that doesn't like your trophies are probably just jealous that they don't have any of their own. As you can see, I have 5 trophies. Okay, maybe they're just pictures in Photoshop, but still. In this tutorial, I want to save all my trophies, or images, in Photoshop. But as you may have noticed, they are all completely different sizes. That's okay with me. I don't mind them having different dimensions, but I don't want them to exceed a certain width and height. Which means that in order to save these, I would have to go up to Image, Image Size, then define my new width and height, then go to File, Save As, then choose the folder I want, click Save, then adjust the quality before finally hitting OK to complete the process. And since I have 5 trophies, I would have to repeat this process 5 times. Thanks to the image processor, there is a faster way. I'll cancel this, then go up to File, Scripts, Image Processor. And what this does is open up my image processor window. Image Processor is a default script that comes with Photoshop, and it takes all the hassle out of saving images individually when you're ready to share them. Image Processor works in steps. Now the first step up here is select the images to process. Right now, it's set to have me select an outside folder to choose my images. You can see next to the box, there's text that reads, "No images have been selected." Well, I don't want to select an outside folder. I already have my images right here in Photoshop. So I'm going to select the first option, Use Open Images. And once that's selected, all the other options are grayed out because they no longer apply. Now I'm ready to move on to the next step. Select location to save processed images. So here I have to choose where it's going to save all my photos. Once again, I could go to Select Folder and save these anywhere on my computer. But I'm happy to keep them where they already are. So I'll click the Save in Same Location. I don't have to worry about overwriting my original files because Image Processor will put these new ones in a brand new folder next to my original images, keeping them nicely separated. The next step I have is File Type. Do I want to save these as JPEG, PSD, or TIFF files? How about all three? Image Processor allows you to save multiple different files as multiple different file types. This is another major difference from using the Save As function, which normally will just let you save one file as one file type at once. I'm going to uncheck the TIFF and PSD file types. I want to keep it simple and just save these as JPEGs. Now remember, JPEGs are compressed file types, so I can choose just how much compression to use while saving them. I can use this quality option here to choose any number between 0 and 12. 12 would give me the highest quality, but since it's using less compression, the file size is going to be fairly high. Instead of setting this to 0 or 12, I'll set this to a happy medium around 8. Here's another option I was mentioning earlier, resize to fit. Now, unlike the image size dialog box, which lets you determine the exact width and height of your image, resize to fit is an option to limit your width and height. So, if I don't want any of my images to be over 500 pixels wide, I can type 500 in the width box. And my image processor will scale the height proportionately to match the width according to each individual image. I don't think I want the height going over 500 pixels either, so I'll set that to 500 as well. Finally, my last option in the image processor is called Preferences. If I check this box called Run Action, it will allow me to apply any saved action in Photoshop to each of my images before they are saved. Beyond that, I also have copyright and profile options. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck Run Action and leave everything else unchanged. Now that I'm ready to save all 5 of my trophies, I'll go up to the top right and click Run. Now the image processor will apply all my options, saving my images one at a time in rapid succession. Okay, it looks like the image processor is done. I'm going to go ahead and minimize Photoshop to get a look at my files. So here are my 5 original images. When I select them one by one, you can see that they all have very high dimensions and file sizes. But right beside them is a folder called JPEG. I didn't make this folder. This must have been put here by the image processor. I'll open it, and lo and behold, there's my same 5 images. And if I select each one, you can see that the file sizes have been dramatically reduced, and neither the height nor the width exceed 500 pixels on any of them. So you can see that Image Processor can spare you a lot of time when it comes to saving images. This comes in handy when you have a lot of trophies to share. Okay, with Perspective Distortion, we learned that we can use the Perspective Crop tool, Lens Correction, and the Adaptive Wide Angle Filter to correct the perspective and distortion of an image. We also went over how to use the Liquefy filter to push the pixels of our image around in minor or major ways. We learned about raw photo files and how to pull them into Camera Raw for color and contrast adjustment with a double raw conversion. And finally, we went over how to edit and save batches of images simultaneously with the image processor. That will do it for photo correction for now.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, do give us a thumbs up and share it. Also check out amazing discounts and offers on our premium courses in the description below.